You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For over 40 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. We are at Optic 2017, and our guests, Lance Keimig and Chris Nicholson from National Parks at Night. Okay, Chris, you did a return visit for you. We had you as a guest last year, and for Lance, this is the first time.
It's the
first time with us. We'll be gentle. It'll be good, I promise you. Lance is the author of Night Photography and Light Painting, Finding Your Way in the Dark, okay? A wonderful book on night photography, and that's going to be the topic of today's conversation.
And Chris Nicholson is the author of?
Chris Nicholson is the author of?
Photographing National Parks, a guide to scouting and shooting America's most treasured lands. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I should memorize the subtitle.
Yeah,
and just for the record, there is an autographed copy yesterday that was signed that is actually out there somewhere.
It is floating around
lucky
somewhere.
owner has that one copy. Anyway, welcome,
we
guys.
should give away books on the podcast, no?
We should,
Colin.
yes.
We'll do that one day. All right. Anyway, so today's topic is
night photography, and we've spoken about it a lot. It's been a topic that is increasingly popular, mostly because a lot of people are starting to do it, and cameras. I think that's a big part of it too. Photography has caught up, the camera gears that we're using. It's possible now to do amazing long exposures in situations where a few years ago it was ridiculously difficult and very few people even bothered trying. So we're going to try to talk about what was compared to what is. And Lance, you started off in shooting film. How long ago? If this is for night photography, long exposures.
I did. I started shooting night photography at the same time picked up the camera and shot my first roll of film, which was about 1985, and was rather a late convert to digital because I worked so hard to develop basically, if you would, a film workflow at night that worked.
Did you get into photography just because you like photography, or did you get into it because you wanted to shoot at night? What's first?
Well, I got into photography because my girlfriend was into photography. And but the first roll of film that we shot together was in my bedroom with the lights turned out, waving flashlights around, pointing the flashlights at each other or at the camera, and it was...
Did you see the Milky Way?
No.
Okay, I was just curious.
But seriously, that was, the photos were not that great, but it was interesting enough to kind of set me on fire for night photography, and that's a fire that's never gone out 30 years later.
So what film were you shooting? Were you doing color or black and white?
Mostly black and white.
Okay.
I did both. I really was mostly interested in black and white, and worked for a long time to develop a combination of film exposures and development that gave pretty good results. Of course, film had reciprocity failure, which was one of the things that made it difficult. It was hard to predict what the right exposure was because, the longer the exposure, the longer the exposure.
Right.
In other words, the more you expose the film, the less sensitive it became. So, there was a lot of trial and error.
Can you explain how that would look as it exposed itself more and it lost the clarity that you were looking for?
Well, it didn't so much lose clarity, just sensitivity, so that it was this never-ending circle that the more you exposed it, the less sensitive it became. So you needed to expose it longer.
The ISO sensitivity diminished as the exposure went on, essentially.
Right. Yeah, and the cool thing about that was that you could go ahead and do an 8-hour exposure and it wouldn't be overexposed because, what we just said. But that would mean that you could do single, very long exposures and have very long star trails going all the way through a frame.
Do different films have different... Well, obviously, different films have different characteristics. Which films were best for long exposures at night? I imagine some were terrible.
Yeah, the very best was Fuji, or still is. They still make it, believe it or not. Fuji Acros, Neopan Acros is amazing. And that film had basically no reciprocity failure up until, a little more than five minutes or so.
Uh-huh.
Whereas when I started was mostly shooting Tri-X, theoretically a 400 speed film. and we were doing like half-hour exposures at f8 under moonlight on Tri-X, and then when the Acros came out, it was more like 10 to 15 minutes at f8, which is theoretically a 100 ASA film.
And you wouldn't know whether it worked or not until the next day when you developed the film. It was a whole different game.
Right, no chimping.
That's exactly, yes. Yes.
So at that time, you immediately were hooked with night photography? I mean, this is not even the way you explained it anyway. You guys were inside a room working with flashlights, and that was enough to kind of get you interested in long exposures and night photography? Or how did that early process work for you?
It was playing with time.
Yeah.
Basically, the way that time would be transformed and compressed. We'd experience time as a continuous thing, and a night photograph is a compression or a representation of a longer period of time in a way that we can never experience it or see it with our eyes. And it also, those long exposures made opportunities for things to happen. Rather than extracting a fraction of a second, when you've got minutes or even hours, there's just a potential for all kinds of problems to happen, but also really magical and interesting.
Little surprises that come along unexpected.
Yeah. And were there any problems that exist? I'm sure there were, but can you tell us some of the problems that existed when you were shooting with film that might come up in that exposure time, and compare that to now and some of those problems that have...
One thing I was curious on that same line of questioning, aside from the fact that the longer you exposed, the longer you had to expose because it would lose sensitivity, was there any kind of blooming or artifacts that would come across on film? Say from point lights, would you get anything happening with that?
Sure, but not as a result of reciprocity failure. And the early people doing night photography on, basically night photography wasn't really possible until the 1870s when the dry plate was invented, because the wet plates had to be coated, exposed, and developed before the emulsion dried on the plate. And it was so insensitive that it just wasn't possible. So in the late 1870s, the dry plate came out, and which was an emulsion on a piece of glass or a metal plate. And the negative process on glass created a reflection off of the back of the surface of the glass called halation.
Yeah.
So
okay.
Shooting into light sources on those early glass plates left basically donuts around any kind of light source. And you can see that on old, mostly 19th century, early 20th century night photographs. I think it was around, Stiglitz was one of the first night photographers to use the plates, new and improved plates with anti-halation coating that on the back that minimized that problem. Even the film that we used up until, if you're still shooting film up until today, has an anti-halation coating on it to prevent that kind of glare from backlighting situations.
So let's jump forward to the 80s when you're shooting and some of the 1980s.
Right. Yeah, right. I'm not that old.
And some of the issues that were coming up.
Well, one of the issues that I've encountered frequently ranged from curious onlookers to curious security guards and policemen because, it's dark out. Why would you want to take pictures?
Right.
There's no light. You can't take pictures. And that's something that's one of the very first night photographers, Paul Martin, an English photographer at the end of the 19th century, was photographing London later and later into the night and being followed around by policemen with lanterns, walking into his photograph and raising the lantern up. And he wrote about this in his biography. And he'd see the cops coming and take his hat off and put it over the lens. And that's something that, we still have to do today. And having been doing night photography since the 80s, it became more and more popular and more common, and then 9/11 happened, and that changed everything as well. Even though there's never been any terrorism events that related to photography, I can't tell you how many times I've been standing under a bridge taking a half-hour exposure very conspicuously, and cops come up and say, "What are you doing? You can't take a picture of this bridge."
Well, actually, I had a similar experience in New Jersey, New Brunswick. It was at night. I was doing some night photography there, and all of a sudden, 2 squad cars pulled up with their lights from 2 different directions. What are you doing? I had no idea there was a federal building. I was just doing a detail on the corner, and they give me the 3rd degree. And yeah, I'm there at night on a Sunday evening, there's no one in the streets, and I'm taking pictures of a federal building. Well, yeah, I guess I'd stop and ask questions too. But yeah, the suspicions are up a lot. At what point did you start playing around with digital? Because the earliest digital cameras were nothing to write home about. At what point did you say, hey, this is worth experimenting with? Which camera was the first one that proved useful for night photography?
Well, I had been teaching night photography at the New England School of Photography in Boston, and when I started, it was pretty much entirely film and starting to get digital cameras coming through maybe 2001, 2002. And at that time, they were limited to pretty much 30-second exposures at native ISO. Otherwise, they were just too noisy to be useful. I was shooting commercial architecture at the time, and that was one of the later things to transition. So I was still shooting 4x5 film. And I was also photographing artwork for galleries and museums, which was pretty much the very last thing to transition from film to digital.
Yeah.
So I took the plunge in 2005 and bought the 5D, the original 5D. And that was really, I think one of that and the D700 were the cameras that made digital night photography practical.
What are you using now?
750, D750.
Okay, that camera comes up a lot. A lot of people are using that camera.
Yeah, just remarkable high ISO performance and ability to lift underexposed shadows without bringing a whole lot of noise in there. In fact, Jill Waterman did for the Explorer blog a piece on switching from Canon to Nikon.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm not really a gear loyalist for one or the other. There are advantages and disadvantages to every piece of equipment.
I imagine if you have a specific occupation or subject matter, like here, it's very specific. It's night photography, and it has very specific parameters and requirements. You can't really be loyal. You have to go with what tool is now the state of the art for what I need to get the best picture, the neatest picture at the time.
Yeah, except that there hasn't been this one camera that has it all.
There never will be either. Have you played around with any of the Sony cameras, the A7S particular?
Oh yeah, it's amazing. And again, there's the situation where no camera's got everything. The image quality is fantastic. The high ISO performance is fantastic. The image on the live view of that camera is extraordinary in low light conditions, which is, by the way, one of the things I don't like about the Nikon cameras is the live view is really noisy in low light conditions.
Okay.
But the image quality is a lot better than the Canon cameras that I'd used previously. So,
Can we jump back into, during the film years, what kind of camera were you using? Or did you switch a lot, and specifically for night photography?
Okay. Started out with a Canon A1, was my first film camera.
That was a first film camera for a lot of people.
Yeah, AE1 or A1.
yeah, sure.
And then shot with T90s for a long time. That was really the awesome pro Canon camera before autofocus. And I actually never bought an autofocus camera until I switched to digital. So I went from a T90 to a 5D. But mostly I was using Hasselblad equipment and an Ebony 6x9 view camera.
Okay.
Which I still have that one and still use it on occasion, and that's.
Do you find, so how would you compare the digital cameras using today to the larger format black and white cameras that you used to shoot with film?
There's not much of a comparison, really. For me, the biggest part of the difference is in the process. Of course, with film, you've got this, relationship between exposure and development and choosing the right combination of chemistry and film. Coming from an architectural photography background, night photography is kind of a natural thing because of this very slow and methodical way of working. So that makes the transition easier. But I miss working with the view camera. I really enjoy I have perspective control lenses for my digital camera, but it's just not the same as.
It's almost not quite a cigar.
Yeah,
They're great, and they're not the same.
I love the process of both, working in the field with a film camera. I love that mystery of the suspense, like rushing home I can't wait to develop this film and see what I got. So that element of suspense is gone. But on the other hand, it's great to know that you're going home and you got it,
Well,
Did you ever try to compromise and say, I'm going to shoot digital, but I'm just going to turn the monitor off and just make believe I'm shooting? Have you ever done that seriously?
No, I haven't.
Because you say, you're missing this. There's this little element of wonder and say, did I get it? Turn off the monitor and you'll have the same experience, right or wrong?
I don't think so.
Because you're going to cheat.
But, but in night photography and with long exposures, you still get some of that element of suspense, right? Because you have the time factor is built into it, and you have to wait to see. And even when the camera is working to process the image, there's that delay, and you have to. I mean, obviously, it's not the same as going home, and failure is kind of clear after you see it, but.
Yeah, sure. That's absolutely true, and I think that's part of why it's held my interest all this time, because there is, that transformative element of compressing time.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's less of an issue now, especially that newer cameras we're shooting at higher and higher ISOs. Here's a huge difference between the film and digital. Your only option was a long exposure when you're shooting film. We had T-Max 3200 and Ilford Delta 3200, which both had really bad reciprocity failure. So they weren't. You're basically shooting like a 400 speed film.
And I imagine the grain was a little bit too rough on those two, right?
Sure.
Because they were not fine grain films.
Okay, well, think about shooting 6400 ISO with an early DSLR. Grain/noise was a
golf
problem
balls.
as well.
Yeah.
but now it's commonplace for even entry-level DSLRs or mirrorless cameras for people to shoot at 3200, 6400, which enables for the first time recording stars as points of light rather than star trails. So that was part of the unique signature of night photography before, were these long star trails. And now, you can photograph the galactic cloud of the Milky Way with 10 or 15 second exposure, which was absolutely unheard of.
Some of the things that impressed me, I go through Gizmodo a lot, and we're all kind of junkies on that. And it's not unusual now to see that, or Petapixel, for instance, people shooting handheld photographs of the Milky Way through plane windows, and it's like a handheld is for 12 seconds, and there is a sharp picture, and you can see all the detail and the wing. It's like you couldn't do this earlier than that. But does that kind of disappoint you a little bit, the fact that you can just be sitting there on a plane and just blocking off the window and hand holding stuff that you'd be knocking yourself out all night long, sitting there shivering in the desert to do?
No, not really. Actually, I think it's pretty exciting that these kind of things are possible. How long is it going to be before we can stand with our phone and just do a fraction of a second Milky Way photograph? Maybe, maybe not, but it's certainly getting closer. But there are going to be people who do that, and then there are going to be people who are devoted to the craft of fine photography, whether it's night photography or any other kind of photography. Now everyone is a photographer, but not everyone is a good photographer, and everyone will never be a good photographer.
I would say everyone's a photographer, but not everybody knows how to take a picture.
Maybe we could jump over to Chris here. And
yeah, how you been, Chris?
I'm good. I'm enjoying.
Should we get you another cup of coffee?
Maybe just talk a little bit about this idea that I would imagine that for you guys and other night photographers, that the process is half the fun. I mean, being out there at night, maybe it gets cold, maybe you get tired and whatnot, but being out and spending that time, and even the time during exposures when you're talking with friends and you're with people, I imagine that's half of the pleasure, half the reason you're doing it.
Absolutely. And it's something that I think Lance and I were just talking about a month or two ago when we were in Joshua Tree.
During a long exposure.
There's lots of time to talk. But I was thinking about, like I was traveling with Matt Hill last year, who's another of our business partners, and Matt, I find Matt funny because after a shoot, we could be out until 3 a.m. We get back to the hotel, and Matt cracks open his computer, dumps his cards, and he sits there editing. He doesn't go to sleep until he's, until he's done. It's like, I got these 4 great photos. I'm so excited about it. And then he can go to sleep. Me, I can wait weeks before doing that. Not that I always do. I mean, I do like to see the photos, but, I get back to the hotel at 3 a.m. I go to sleep. And, I'll dump the cards, but just for the safety of the data.
Yeah.
I'm perfectly fine waiting until I get home a week later to go through
you
the
get
photos.
another thrill 3 weeks later, right?
Yeah, I guess. But it was something that, Lance and I were talking about it, and I started to think, well, why is that? Why am I not as excited about, seeing the photos right away as Matt is? And you're closer to Matt, right? Like you can get back to the hotel and edit, but not quite as drastic.
For the record, I've never processed film at 3 a.m.
The film, right? Yeah. But I started thinking about it, and I realized that for me, such a big part of the fun is the being out shooting, and being in the national parks and out in these beautiful places that are quiet and in the middle of the wilderness, and
It's the experience.
And finding the photos and working on them, and working the angles, working the scene, and it's for me, and I've just realized this recently, it's so much about the experience. And I love the photography. I love going through the images later and seeing them up on the displays here at a conference and stuff. I mean, that's great. But I guess for me, it's being out there.
Let me ask you, I mean, you guys have shot together a lot of times in a lot of places. I'm sure a lot of long nights. Has anybody ever unintentionally, ruined someone's photo? Like someone's goes off
Actually
to go to the
kick the
bathroom
tripod leg
and you
or
run
something.
around with a flashlight and kind of mess with the other guys.
Did you say intentionally or unintentionally?
I said intentionally, but let's just talk stories. Well, either way.
But once
drop
an hour
names.
maybe.
Yeah, in a workshop situation, it's kind of inevitable.
Yeah.
Yeah, even if it's just Lance and I shooting, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's part of the nature. There's an etiquette involved. There's best practice. Say I'm about to light up a flashlight so I can focus or light paint something. I'll say, Lance, are you open?
Right.
And if he is, then I'll wait, and if he's not, I can go ahead with it. But sometimes you get caught up in the moment, or you don't hear somebody, or so it happens.
Yeah.
And it's something you just have to understand when you go out there. Sure. I am going to mess up somebody's shot at some point, and somebody's going to mess up mine, and you just roll with it. And there's things you can do to deal with it too. Sometimes if somebody turns on a light in the middle of my exposure, maybe a car goes by or somebody's flash, I'll just let it finish, because who knows, there might be magic that happened in that moment. In fact, I was just joking with Lance last week. 2 weeks ago, we finished up our workshop in Cape Cod National Seashore, and the last night we were out shooting, and I was doing a photo, just a dune fence with the dunes and the stars in the background, and right as I started my first one of the workshop students was leaving, and she turned on her headlamp or something, and I said, great, there's a 4-minute exposure down the tubes. I spent another 45 minutes there lighting it different ways myself, and did not come up with a lighting situation I liked as much as that headlamp that turned on on the first one. And that's the shot I ended up keeping.
There you go.
What's the biggest surprise you've ever had when you open up a file and say, wow, look, where'd that come from? What kind of thing? Because things do happen.
Yeah.
What was the most pleasant surprise or goofiest surprise you've ever had as far as seeing something that showed up in a picture that you didn't even know existed?
I can think of one photograph in particular where there was an airplane trail that made a big arc through the sky in like a C pattern that was not reflected, but it was also the opposite pattern was in the ground in a concrete area, this circular pattern. So the
coincidentally,
the sea in the sky just connected beautifully with this backwards sea in the ground and made this big S that went right through the frame and just completed the composition in a way that it would have been a whole lot less interesting had that plane not gone through there.
Neat
example. Yeah.
Most of the time, planes though are
Pain in the butt.
a real pain in the butt.
Yeah.
It seems that a lot of the national parks are under the flight paths of
Oh yeah.
L.A. and San Francisco.
I want to talk more about some of the during the film era, and maybe you could talk about your process. And how you came to calculate exposure times and how you work when you can't check your image after the fact.
And to add on to that, light meters in the day of film, were they even worth considering?
Not at all.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Okay.
No. Autofocus was pretty much useless, and for the most part, light meters are not particularly useful. In low light situations, moonlight or less, the meters just aren't accurate. And in urban situations where you've got little pinpoint light sources and lots of dark areas, that it's just not, you can't really get a good reading. Once I realized that night photography was something I wanted to pursue seriously, I moved to San Francisco to study with a guy named Steve Harper, who developed the first college-level class on night photography. So a lot of what I learned was through Steve and his classes. And basically, it was just a lot of experimenting and note-taking in different conditions. And you had to repeat it over and over again and compare notes and compare films. I never went to the point of, plotting film curves on a densitometer, but I certainly would, work to improve my negatives so that I could make, as close to straight print as possible without a lot of darkroom manipulation. And it was, again, just trial and error, using different combinations of film, and chemistry, exposures. I basically had, a chart that would be, updated over time. That it was an exposure guideline and a separate film development guideline.
What kind of developer did you use? What was your favorite for?
I just have to throw in plotting film curves on a, who even knows what that means? The depth of your knowledge just blows me away.
Yeah.
Usually plotting, that kind of stuff, is done by photographers who spend so much time plotting exposures they never take pictures.
Okay. That is so true.
Right?
That is absolutely so true. Yeah.
I hate to insult the geeks, but I know too many people that make their career is measuring their apertures and their lenses. It's not really 5.6 or f8. It's who cares?
Yeah,
but yeah, they get sucked into it and they never take a picture.
Yeah, they're the guys with the 8x10 cameras that take a picture of the side of their house and spend like 6 months plotting film curves to get it just right.
Yeah, but they match that grade dead on.
That's right. The zone system. Where the heck were we? Developers. Yeah, my favorite film developer combination that was what I still work with today, and I probably came to this probably in the late '90s, was Xtal film developer and the Fuji Neopan Acros film.
And both are still available today.
Both are still available.
Okay.
Yeah. So the Xtal developer diluted to 1:3, which is usually it's either straight or 1:1, but the dilute developer with reduced agitation was the way to basically keep your highlights from being blown out and allow the shadows to develop first or develop over time, because the more densely exposed parts of your negative, the highlights would develop very quickly, and if you let the film rest in the developer without agitating it, the developer that was in contact with the highlight areas would exhaust itself. And the developer that was in contact with the less exposed shadow areas would continue to work. So another favorite developer was Diafine, which is a two-part developer where you do 3 minutes in A and 3 minutes in B. And you pretty much do any film and get really decent negatives. The biggest challenge was, getting enough meat on the shadow part of the negative, and then in the developing process, getting whatever information was there to develop without having blown highlights.
And how much is the grain affected when you get into these longer exposures? I imagine it's also based on which film you're using, but that's also probably a critical thing, because if it starts clumping up too much, there goes your detail.
Well, it's interesting because that's one way that digital and film are pretty similar. Obviously grain and noise are not the same thing, but you have more grain in the shadow areas just the way you have more grain in the film area, in the shadow areas on on digital
noise.
photographs.
Is it more easy to manage though digitally? I would imagine it is. Through post
Yeah, sure,
processing.
sure.
Yeah.
You know, the what you can do in Lightroom or Photoshop far exceeds what we could do in the darkroom. But you know, we would basically just print it dark. You know, so if
Yes.
you have lots of dark black areas with minimal shadow detail, there wasn't any grain.
And how about working with color film? Did you shoot much in the day with color in terms of night photography? And what differences did you find?
Yeah, the color negative film was certainly better than transparency film because it had a wider reciprocity failure, not wider exposure latitude, excuse me. And my favorite film of all time was for color was Fuji NPL, L for long exposure.
Right.
It was a tungsten balanced film, mostly used by architectural photographers, and that was it was really fun to shoot color negative film if you're doing your own printing, so C-prints, you know, in the wet darkroom, because working in mixed lighting situations, there was tremendous opportunity for surreal colors, and because you can't color correct or color balance for multiple light sources, just as well we can now with some work in software, but back in the darkroom it was, you know, you balance for the sodium vapor or you balance for the mercury vapor or the fluorescent lights, but not for
And everything else
all
goes
of-
to hell. Yeah.
But that was, you know, that was the good thing. That was what was cool about it, was because you had these really bizarre and surreal colors. If you were trying to shoot film at night and get realistic natural colors, forget about it. You know, you just pull your hair out. But now, just as a side note, the world is switching from sodium vapor and metal halide lights to LEDs.
yeah.
It's becoming, you know, more
It's
uniform.
more predictable too. Yeah.
Yeah.
The light is more uniform.
A lot less
yeah.
interesting too.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good point. How about if we just talk 5 ways, maybe even in terms of the most updated cameras, that, you know, digital photography has made it easier for night photography, and whether that be modes within the camera or just the fact that ISOs are so so high or so more improved.
Well, first, of course, is just being able to review the image. The level of sophistication of the technology that we can, you know, the cameras are a lot easier to work with. They're, on one hand, you've got a lot more variables, a lot more controls, but on the other hand, you have just such incredible power at your hand. Got any there, Chris?
Make it easier.
Yeah.
I mean, I think more in terms of how it makes it possible to do better images.
Hey now,
Yeah.
easy there.
All right, let's hear something.
No, I mean that industry wide. It doesn't make it easier, but the people who are really good at it, it gives you more possibilities to push the camera further, because now you can push it further and experiment more and do things that you couldn't do before. So you were talking before about just being able to do a Milky Way photo. I mean, it was just a few years ago where that was such a huge wow factor. Like, we'd never seen that before. So I think of it more in those terms. But high ISO and being able to use a histogram. One of the tricks shooting at night is your eyes get adjusted to the dark, so that LCD in the back of the camera looks brighter than it really is. And if you're not paying attention to what your exposure really is, you get home and those photos are dark. So being able to use a histogram, the light meter of the 21st century, to make sure that you really are producing what you intend to produce.
Right, and having things like not just the histogram, but the blinking highlight indicator or focus peaking, all these things that theoretically make it easier. But I think Chris hit it on the head, that it's not necessarily easier, but there's more flexibility and more adaptability, and we can photograph in virtually any conditions. Back in the film day, we were limited to 3 or 4 days a month around the full moon. Nobody would go out in the new moon and try to photograph. There just wasn't enough light outside of the urban areas to photograph at night with film. And these days, we go out into a national park under a full moon and there are no photographers. But if you go out under the new moon and you can't find a place to set up your tripod because everybody wants to photograph the Milky Way.
Yeah.
And that's actually one of my pet peeves is that today people associate night photography with photographing the Milky Way, and it's become commonplace to see that. We're all kind of used to that, but people have forgotten that we have ISOs other than 6400. It's true.
No, but I totally agree with you. I mean, when you see, you thumb through your Instagram and there's, a photograph of the Milky Way, twice a day from a different photographer, and it gets a little bit boring, And we talked about this before about, putting elements in the foreground and ways
the stars
to make
are all the same. It's what you frame it with.
Yeah.
That's the only difference between all the pictures. How you frame it, what you frame with. It's like, it's all there. Every night it's there. So what do you do with it then?
Just up in Cape Cod, Lance had this great idea where the Highland Lighthouse, beautiful lighthouse, and had the Milky Way going over, and Lance did a panorama, a stitched panorama of that, which is more complicated than it sounds. I mean, doing a stitch pano is, it's not a basic technique to begin with, but on top of it, you've got a lighthouse that's throwing out light in the middle of 20-second exposures, and just having to deal with that as an exposure issue, along with a stitch pano. It was pretty wild to see you tackle that.
Yeah, the light's coming around again. Cover the lens real quick. And
I was just going to ask you, did you just keep flipping your hand in front of the lens?
Yep,
right?
that's one technique. Chris actually did a great presentation on photographing lighthouses and different techniques where you could do it either at twilight when the light for the lighthouse and the ambient light is balanced,
right?
But that's not really night photography. Or you can do a manual blending of an exposure for the light and another one for everything else, or HDR where you have use software to do layer blending. Combining the dynamic range of a bright light source like a lighthouse with a starlit landscape, and then trying to combine that with a half a dozen shots with the Milky Way rising over top of it is.
How'd it turn out?
Awesome.
Actually, a former student of mine posted an image, stitched panorama of that same lighthouse that she did, and I was asking her about it because it was stunning, better than what I did, and she said that it took her 3 years to get the shot. And that's why I'm not worried about people sticking their phone out the airplane window and shooting the Milky Way, because those people are not going to spend 3 years trying to get one shot. And she said that it was the photograph that she's most proud of, and deservedly so.
And I think that points to an important concept that, the technology is getting better, and there's things that are easy now that were hard before, but the good photographers tend to be the ones who are pushing the limits of the gear. And this better gear just means that there's new limits to explore, and there's new photo opportunities that we haven't thought of yet because they weren't possible yesterday. So even though the gear is better and more people are using it, and there's more people who think of themselves as photographers, the leaders are always going to be the leaders in finding something new to do. And it's a good thing. It's how the industry goes forward. It's why we do images today that we couldn't do yesterday. And it's why there's going to be images tomorrow that we can't do today.
Yeah, spot on, Chris.
Good job.
We hope you're enjoying this edition of the B&H Photography Podcast. Send us a tweet at BHPhotoVideo, #BHPhotoPodcast.
We were talking a little bit about some of the techniques that are available on the latest cameras, and we were going to get back to white balance, was something maybe you wanted to talk about. And we know some cameras, and you were playing with it, Chris, yourself. You're talking about composite imaging on the Olympus cameras, right, that are new?
So, on that list of things that cameras can do today that make life easier or allow you to do better work, depending on how you look at it.
Right.
White balance, the ability to be able to flip your white balance mid-shoot is something I definitely put in that list. When you were shooting film and you wanted a different look, you might have to change rolls. If your roll wasn't done, maybe you'd have to get a leader retriever and pull it back out again later when you were going to switch back. And now you just
Or
change your
carry
white
a
balance.
separate body for each film stop.
Yeah, exactly.
Which people
now,
did.
You at a different light situation, change your white balance to what you need it to be. If you didn't get it right, you can fix it in post-processing, adjust it a bit. I mean, you're not limited to the 3 kinds of film you might have in your bag, but you've got the entire color spectrum to work with and really nail what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and to go along with that, of course, being able to change ISO with every single photograph. You can do a 20-minute star trail exposure at 100 ISO on one shot, and then the next frame change it to 6400 and do 15 seconds, and have completely different photographs. But yeah, I used to have different film backs in my bag, one for color, one for high contrast black and white, and one for normal contrast black and white. So they'd be indicated, which one would be processed normally, one would be processed in the diaphine or really dilute developer.
We're talking about white balance. When you're shooting at night, assuming you're not introducing any kind of artificial lights or the street lights or anything man-made going on, is daylight the correct white balance used? Because we're still working with sunlight ultimately. I got little smiles and chuckles here. Let's talk about that, because it seems to me daylight would come out bluer at night. I'm just guessing right now. What's so?
It's one of the most common questions we get on workshops. I mean, this comes up. We probably get asked this 5 times a day, 5 times a night. Right. What white balance should I be using?
You should be using the white balance that gives you results that you like.
So it's
no
subjective.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong white balance.
Now, wedding photographers can't get away with that expression. You can't say that. Okay.
Yeah, that's skin tone's relatively important, but moonlight is 4,100 degrees Kelvin.
Ah, okay.
So
it's closer to tungsten, actually.
Yeah, and we used to shoot tungsten film. If we're shooting color film,
you mentioned
because
that, yes.
the bluish color would give us more of a nocturnal feel. If you shoot night photographs under moonlight at daylight white balance, it looks kind of like a day shot. So,
and does that vary with the phase of the moon, or is that a constant?
It might, not so much the phase of the moon, but the elevation of the moon.
Sure,
so,
yeah.
because if it's coming through atmosphere with a lot of dust or moisture, that'll, when the moon's rising, it will often appear orange, and when it's high up in the sky, it's white.
Is that why? Yeah. I thought
it
needed time to warm up a little bit.
Brilliant.
And how about, because this has come up, and maybe you guys talk about this and that. What's the definition of a night photo, other than, and because you also said earlier when you were taking a picture of the lighthouse that it really wasn't a night photo. So how would you define a night photo?
That gives me an idea for a new workshop program: National Parks at Twilight.
There you go.
Would that mean that we have to get up and do sunrise pictures?
Yeah, sure. Dawn.
Okay, that's your that's your job.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, it's funny that you asked that question, because some people get really hung up on, that's not a night photograph. There's still a tiny little bit of twilight in the western sky. It's not night yet. Right. And a lot of people who do night photography, they really say, when it's as dark as it's going to get, that's night photography, and you shouldn't go out and shoot before that. And in fact, my mentor and teacher, Steve Harper, had that kind of attitude. But one of my favorite photographers, and I'll say photographer because he considers himself an anytime photographer rather than a day or a night photographer, Michael Kenna, who was the keynote speaker here last year at the Optic Conference. He's known for doing a lot of long exposures and a lot of night photography. But if you ask him, I'm an anytime photographer, and he doesn't differentiate, and he doesn't particularly care if a day photo looks like a night photo or a night photo looks like a day photo. And I think that probably comes from one of his major influences was Bill Brandt, and Brandt was known for, if Photoshop had been invented in the 1930s, Brandt would have, been the evangelist for it, because he tweaked and manipulated his work in the darkroom to get an effect that he was looking for. And that kind of speaks to the, right or wrong white balance question as well. It's, the effect that you're trying to achieve. So
can you take a night photo in the daytime?
Sure, you put 10 to 13 stops of neutral density on your in front of your
Let the
lens,
exposure
and
go. Yeah.
and do 4, 5, 6 minute exposures.
And
It only
obviously-
works in specific conditions, but there are photographers like David Focos and Michael Levin who've made careers out of that. Probably others I'm not thinking of right now.
Well, if you go back to early cinema, they didn't
Chip
photograph
Farrelly
at
here in New
night.
York.
Yeah, right. Yes, motion pictures that when they did night scene, it was shot during the day with like dark blue filters to emulate the look of a full moon illumination. But it was all shot at daylight. They couldn't shoot at night. It didn't exist.
Yep.
John Ford, a lot of those westerns,
Yeah,
obviously
yeah,
pretty famous
yeah.
for that day
Yeah.
for night stuff. Yeah, interesting. And any other? I mean, you just mentioned 3 photographers, but are there any night photographers or long exposure photographers that you like to talk about or mention?
I can't believe you
Other
just
than
asked
you guys?
Lance that question. How much time do you have?
We're here till 6.
20 minutes.
It's going to take that long. Go for it, Lance.
Well, if you ask me that question, I'm going to
Alphabetically, of course.
I'm going to talk about, Bresai and Bill Brandt and lesser known photographers from history like Harold Burdekin and John Morrison, who were inspired by Bresai's work, along with many other people. The great train photographer O. Winston Link.
Oh, yes.
The stuff he did in the late 50s was just absolutely mind-boggling. For contemporary photographers, there are so many people. Night photography has become specialized. You're just not a night photographer anymore. You do a particular sort of thing, light painting or light drawing or astrophotography or star trail photography or any kind of thing.
Yeah, I just want to jump back to that. You mentioned Winston Link, whose work I always loved. For those of you not familiar with the name, he photographed trains back in the 50s, very elaborate. Now, he photographed at night, but would you call him a night photographer? Because his sets he lit everything, for ridiculous detail.
Yes.
So would you still consider that night photography?
Well, sure. Yeah,
I mean, the pictures were taken at night, but I look at those and they are so illuminated.
Yeah. Well, he was using his experience as a commercial industrial photographer to basically light these enormous sets, and he was solving technical problems. He was, documenting the last steam railroad in the country, and wanted to illustrate. He was telling stories. He wanted to show these small towns and the life in the small towns as the trains went through. And there really wasn't, doing a long exposure with the train going by through the station, it's not going to tell that story.
No.
So he was using, hundreds of yards of cables and
Tons of flash
cases
bulbs.
of flash bulbs. Yeah,
cases, that's right.
Yeah, he had custom metal reflectors fabricated that would hold, like a dozen flash bulbs because he's trying to light, a black steam locomotive.
And everything around it.
Yeah, right. So, he wasn't a light painter in the sense that light painting is typically working with handheld lights, but he certainly was a night photographer.
I'd say the closest you'd come to light painting in his images, there was one shot where the train's going by and it's going alongside a drive-in movie theater, and he held detail on the screen.
Well, that's the one picture he used Photoshop on.
Really? Well, he did play around with that one?
No, he didn't use Photoshop. But actually, I saw a lecture by his assistant talking about how that image was made. And all of his images, except for that one, were straight shots, single images. But he really wanted to. It's on the screen in the drive-in is an airplane. It's an
F-86 Saberjet, to be exact.
Thank you. I could not have identified. But there's a train going by the drive-in, and there's a couple of kids sitting in the back of his car, the convertible car, and he told them he'd buy them tickets to go to the movies if they'd sit there and pose for him. But he really wanted to show these multiple modes of transportation, so the image of the plane was printed in the darkroom. Because during the long exposure on the screen, it just went white. A perfect example of that is, you ever see Hiroshi Sugimoto's theater series?
Oh, yes.
Lit by the light of the movie, and the exposure length was determined by the length of the film. Well, it's the same thing. The drive-in screen was white from the overexposure, and it made it very easy for him to just print that in the darkroom.
I didn't know that about the Sugimoto. The exposure time was the length of the movie that was being screened?
Yep, yeah, he set up in the back of the theater, and the trailer came on, and he opened it up, and the movie was over, and he closed it.
I just assumed he just had a white light projected from the projector onto the screen. I didn't realize it was actually during a motion picture playing back. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
And those pictures are amazing.
I may be mistaken, but I thought the name of the photographs was the name of the film.
I'll have to check into that. I think actually
Okay.
I have that book
He may have the name of the theater and the name of the movie, I think.
I never even got down to what was written. I was just staring at those pictures. I remember them very clearly. Those
So Chris,
were amazing.
what's your night photography taking you to right now? Are you doing light painting? Are you doing cityscapes, or is it all just national parks? And how about astrophotography? Where are you going?
Mostly national parks.
Okay.
Yeah. Doing some light painting and some not. Just whatever the situation calls
Okay,
for.
all right.
Shooting under moonlight, new moon.
And do you go out mostly when you're leading a workshop, or do you go out on your own and experiment with new things?
Both. It's a lot of what I'm doing is related to a workshop, whether it's on a workshop or preparing for a workshop or scouting a location for a possible workshop. Just from a business perspective, I'm trying to layer responsibilities onto a trip and maximize the investment. But anytime I get to spend in a national park is good for me.
Sure. But during a workshop, we generally don't have a whole lot of time to photograph for ourselves, so we typically build in a couple of days on the either end of the workshop to reserve for ourselves to photograph.
And are you guys always trying something new, or?
I have a couple of different series of bodies of work that long-term projects that are going on, and one of them is in national parks, the lovely architecture of the outhouses. It's a project called Lose with Views. Trying to find. I often photograph the human element in nature. Mm-hmm. That's something that probably comes from Michael Kenna. He does as well, and it's so that kind of a goofy series, and I don't know what's ever going to come of that, but
I hope you finish it. I look forward to it. I think it'd be a great series.
There's some amazing photos. It sounds just like fun when you hear them describe it.
Yeah.
But the photos are really cool.
I'll bet.
They're really something.
And are you light painting the bathrooms themselves?
Yeah, I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't. It's all about light painting the structures. Yeah. Well, thankfully, photographs don't have any odor.
Well, I think that Sony's working on that actually. So
Yeah, scratch and sniff sensors they're coming out with. I understand. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Are there any particular spots that you guys love to photograph? I know you guys are, national parks guys, but other than that, any countries, locations, particular parks?
I can't get enough of Olympic National Park. We're doing 2 workshops there in September, and I can't even tell you how much I'm looking forward to. I'd be spending 17 days there,
And do you guys camp when you're there, or you guys get hotels nearby?
Sometimes. If we're in a workshop, we're usually in a hotel because we need to be able to sleep well and shower so we can be presentable and coherent for the class in the morning. But if I'm out on my own, I have no problem camping. I'll bring a tent with me, and I like camping. It reminds me of childhood, camping with my dad and camping with my family, and but also it gets you closer to the location, right? If you want to, I hate to bring up daylight, but if you wanted to shoot sunrise, you could drive an hour from the hotel to your spot, or you could camp next to it and get up in the morning and shoot.
Figuring out the dynamics of these guys' workshops here.
Yeah. Well, you were talking about, half or more of night photography being the experience of being out there, and camping out in nature, it just, amplifies that experience and makes it a more, inclusive, holistic thing to, we were talking about that in Joshua Tree. Geez, I wish we were camping out here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Part of it is, being able to set up a tripod for a stack of long exposures. You're going to do a couple hours of star trails. You can just crawl in your tent, leave the camera going, and then
or the idea of doing an all-night exposure. I mean, You want to leave your $5,000 camera and $2,000 lens in the wilderness when you go back to the hotel, or would you rather camp next to it?
Well, Michael Kenner actually spoke. He used to, for a lot of his pictures, he would leave his camera, set them up, and then go back and go to sleep and come back in the morning and collect it all.
Sure.
But he'd leave his cameras in different places.
Sure, but do you want to? I don't.
Me, no.
I'd rather just camp next to it.
That's it, yes.
I wanted to ask quickly about lenses, if there's anything that comes to mind.
Well, in terms of lenses, fast glass makes it easier, especially if you're going to be going for those star points or Milky Way shots. You're pushing the limits of ISO, aperture, and shutter speed to be able to do this. So, wide, fast lenses are always the best.
Do you find a big difference shooting at wide aperture for this type of work as opposed to stopping down a little bit? Is there a big difference in image quality?
It all depends on what your tolerance is for image quality, and also what you're doing with your images. If they're living on Facebook, no. If you're making mural-sized prints, sure, of course. But at this point right now, we're like I said, we're pushing the limits of all three exposure variables to be able to photograph the starry night sky. And so, being able to shoot at 2.8 or faster is pretty much a requirement. You're going to have to compromise somewhere.
There's a balance you have to strike, sure.
Yeah. In terms of lenses, particular lenses, the Nikon 14 to 24 and the more recent Tamron 15 to 30, both 2.8 lenses are extraordinary. They're big, heavy beasts, but
even wide open though, the resolving power and the contrast and the flare control is really astonishing on those.
Yeah, absolutely. And I haven't played with it, but I understand the third incarnation of the Canon 16 to 35 2.8 is vastly improved as well. But there are new and interesting options coming out. There's the whole line of Rokinon lenses that have been made wide fast glass affordable for people, and we just had at the last couple of workshops these IRIX lenses. It's a new joint
Todd
thing.
was just using those.
Yeah, yeah, a joint venture between Swiss engineering and Korean manufacturing, and they have a feature that allows you to lock the focus ring once you achieve focus, and that's a big issue with night photography when you're shooting wide open, and focus has to be so precise and critical. So there's.
And are you focusing just with your eye at this point, or are you using the tools of digitals
I'm using the same focusing technique that I used 25 years ago in hyperfocal, basically, because I want to maximize the depth of field because I'm shooting at very wide apertures. I'm not usually doing just distant horizon and sky. I've got foreground elements, and I want to maximize my depth of field. So I use hyperfocal.
Okay.
All right. Chris, what would you like to plug? Upcoming books, trips, seminars?
Well, we've got. So I just did. Well, both of us just did 3 workshops over the course of about 5 weeks. 2 of them together, but we've got. I think one that's going to be really cool. Neither one of us are working on it, but Gabe Biederman and Tim Cooper, our other 2 business partners, along with Matt Hill, they're leading a workshop in Dry Tortugas National Park, which is an island park about 60 miles off of Key West, and it's going to be based on a boat. Shooting at night. The park has opened up the fort to us at night. It's usually closed, so we're going to get some great access. That's going to be a lot of fun. I wish I was going to be on that.
When's that going to be?
That's next month. It's in July.
Okay.
And then
spots still available, as far as you know?
There are 2. There are 2 people here at the conference who are asking about it, so we might. Fingers crossed. But right now there's 2. So and then Lance is going to be in West Fjords. Great Sand Dunes. Those are both in August.
Those are both in August and both full. But right now we're working on our calendar for next year, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff. We're going to be expanding our schedule and branching out, reaching out, doing more workshops than this year. Just the response has been so great, and we just want to explore new places. So,
go to national parks at night alumni.com.
Our alumni gets first notice, and then our email list gets second noticed, and then we go public.
How many people do you have as repeat voyagers?
Oh, you just figured that out. How many was
Was
it?
it 26%, I think?
That's pretty good.
Yeah. We have our Olympic workshop the first week. I think a third of the participants are from previous workshops, which is great.
And what's the ratio to teacher to student?
Maximum of 7-1. Right.
With the night photography thing, people, when they first do it, they either get it or they don't. And like myself, they end up being, converts for life. Or some people, it just doesn't work for them. They can't stay out late, or they can't, get used to stumbling around in the dark. But I'd say probably at least half the people that get into night photography on one level stick with it. And a lot of those people, whether or not they're doing multiple workshops with us or with somebody else or just going out on their own, it becomes a lifelong passion, as it certainly is for the five of us.
I know also there's a comfort level that comes, you're out shooting in the wilderness in the dark. It's more comfortable to be around other people than to be out there alone. I mean, I've done it a bunch, and there's still times that I'm out alone in the middle of nature, and
there's bears out there.
There's bears. Your mind can play tricks on you. It's just more comfortable, the safety in numbers.
Sure.
It's also nice to just have other people to work with in general, but even with night photography, it's nice to be able to ask somebody, hey, could you shine a light on that so I can focus? Or can you help me with the light painting? It's you have a complex concept. It's maybe easier to pull off if you have a person or two helping you. So even if you're not on a workshop, if you're going out shooting at night, it's just great to be with other people for all those reasons.
All right. Lance Keimig and Chris Nicholson, thank you guys so much for stopping by.
National Parks at Night.
National Parks at Night, and there's always something new to shoot out there, eh?
There is. Thank you for having us.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool.